Good morning, everyone. It's 10:29, and the Writers' House we do a few things wrong and a lot of things right, and one of the things we do right is to start on time. And on a weekday morning, isn't that great? We can do a program on a weekday morning. Most of the people here, Joan, have, unlike you and I who don't have well-defined jobs, that a lot of people in the room have things they have to do, and we are so grateful that you came, took some time out from work to spend some time here at the Writers' House. Welcome back. Just a few preliminaries from me. First of all, we had a great day yesterday, and I just wanted to start by thanking Joan Didion for spending so much time with us, for coming down. Welcome again, Joan Didion, to the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
A few thank yous. There's some people standing, and that's crazy. Lily, there's a seat for you here. There's another seat right there, third row. Harry, why would you stand when you could sit? You're introducing. Okay. Ellie, you're good? You know what you're doing? Okay. So Jamie Lee Jocelyn, who has coordinated Writers' House Fellows program, not since the beginning, but it feels like it. She's just done such a great job. And I just want to pause a little longer than usual to thank Jamie Lee for unbelievable work for the school and for the Writers' House, and in the last couple days and really weeks for Joan. Jamie Lee Jocelyn, she's in the back, please. Mark Lindsay is our IT manager. He does a fantastic job with this. And when he raises his hand, it's not to ask a question, but because he's adjusting this amazing camera, which is beaming us everywhere live. And judging from the responses I got, Joan, more than 100 people are watching us live at work or home or wherever they are, I guess, in the middle of the night if they're in Australia. And so welcome to you, and thank you, Mark. Pamela Tackifman, who did the introduction last night. Thank you, Pamela, for doing such a great job. A few shout-outs. Yeah, wasn't that good? A few quick shout-outs. First of all, Rebecca Bushnell is here. She comes to the Writers' House as often as she can, but as the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences here, that teeny-weeny entity that she has a lot of work to do to manage and lead. She came here because she is an admirer of Joan Didion and a great literature person. And Rebecca, thank you for supporting the Writers' House as often and consistently as you do. Rebecca Bushnell. Rebecca Bushnell, who is a great friend. Yes, I have to learn how to. I have a director in the first row telling me how to speak. Just a couple more. Sylvia Cowders is here, and she is here. She is Sylvia, who supports us tremendously. Thank you. Judith Zarin. Where's Judith? Thank you for everything you do for Penn and for the Writers' House. Judith has enabled us to publish The Green Couch, which is edited by another guy in the room, Eric Carlin, and of course John and Barbara Avnet, who have been incredibly supportive. This is a love note to you guys from all of us, because Joan is a dear friend, of course. You've been supportive of us. You got us what the Writers' House is trying to do from the beginning. You are, and talking with you, John, yesterday it's like being an educator. You know, like it doesn't matter if you're a tuition-paying student. It's better if you are, but it doesn't really matter because we just talk ideas all the time, and I enjoy it so much. So welcome, John Avnet and Barbara. So the format is simple. Joan and I are up here to talk, to converse. For a while, I'll ask the questions, and we'll converse, the two of us. And then at a certain point, Joan, I will look to these folks to ask questions. And Ellie Kane, who is a senior, who's done this all 4 years, she's taken this course all 4 years, which is a little weird, has the portable mic, and she's the expert, and she will bring it around. And for the sake of the recording and for those who are watching, please allow Ellie to hold the mic and wait for her to come to you. So there'll be a point where I will turn to you. I wanted to begin by, we talked a lot about Joan Didion yesterday. Maybe it would be good to start by talking about Ernest Hemingway. I overheard, we talked about Henry James and his importance to you, or the likeness, and you said yesterday afternoon that writing like James was intimidating, and you imagined when you first wrote that you wanted to do something as perfect as that, and it was very difficult to do. Some of us would argue that there are a number of books that you've done I think I made the argument yesterday that are every bit as good as Henry James. That's saying something, I think. And Hemingway didn't get mentioned, although I think many of us know that Hemingway is important to you. And I thought to focus the first question about Hemingway, I would read just a very short passage from Hemingway, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit. It comes from nowhere, I'm sorry, but I think the Hemingway that influences you, and I could be wrong about this, is the Hemingway that Stein liked, the cubistic Hemingway, the repetitive Hemingway that tries at something from all angles. And the passage that I have is very brief, is from an early piece, in fact, about what might be called the edges of the Armenian genocide. It's about the Turks in World War I. The strange thing was, he said, how they screamed every night at midnight. I do not know why they screamed at that time. We were in the harbor, and they were on the pier, and at midnight they started screaming. We used to turn the searchlight on them to quiet them. That always did the trick. We'd run the searchlight up and down over them 2 or 3 times, and they stopped it. So there's repetition there. There's coming at all angles.
Well, what always fascinated me about Hemingway was how important the placement of the commas was. I mean, if you read through, that passage doesn't particularly have any comma interest.
No, it's full of conjunctions.
But the beginning of, and he used a lot of conjunctions in lieu of commas.
Right.
But the beginning of A Farewell to Arms, which I actually analyzed once, is fantastic for the comma use. I mean, if you just read through it and you count the words, you count the number of the number of ands, you can count the repetitions, but also the drama of the comma use is he has a series, a series of things that are linked by no commas and ands. And then suddenly you've got a comma and no and. Well, somehow that's thrilling.
Yes, and your one of the things that you get from Hemingway and writing of this sort is the power of the juxtaposition. We were talking about imagism yesterday. For instance, my favorite juxtapositions in Joan Didion are one I mentioned yesterday, which is what the FBI found when they searched Marin's apartment. They found a .30 caliber Browning automatic rifle and a translucent pink retainer, orthodontist retainer, those 2 things. And you just leave it there. If you get the details,
if you get the specificity, you can do that kind of thing into eternity. It's not really very hard.
Well, I beg to differ. I mean, it's not hard for you. You put the and between those 2 things, and I, of course, since I'm academic, I reached for the yellow highlighter, and I wrote on the side something like imagism, petals on a wet black bough. There's no and in that, except that you have these images that juxtapose everything that we need to know about Marin, and you never go deep. You don't go into you don't present emotional facts there, but you say a whole lot about being the mother of a daughter who has a Browning rifle and a retainer. The retainer suggests something maternal, like, wouldn't it be nice if her teeth were beautiful? Mm-hmm. So Hemingway doesn't go, he tries not to go below the surface, and I take it that that's something that you learned from him and others.
I think probably I learned it from Hemingway,
yeah. So last night...
If you go below the surface, you get it wrong. I mean, if you can get it right, you can get the surface right. And if you get the surface right, it tells you the rest.
And that is, obviously, I'm saying something obvious in a room full of people who've read you closely. That is a hallmark of your style. And so many writers go deep. They want to go deep. That is, they want to do emotional information, and you don't. Except that when we got to The Year of Magical Thinking, which both is and isn't a book that's very different from the other books, you refer to, in a passage you read for us last night, you say that you developed a sense that meaning itself was resident in the rhythms and words and sentences and paragraphs, a technique for withholding whatever it was you thought or believed behind an increasingly impenetrable polish. So is that the downside to the Hemingway surface, that you get to hide?
You get to hide. Yes, it is the downside.
And this is a book in which you decided to try something different.
Yeah,
or
but
the
I
same?
did. But it didn't. But I decided in my conscious mind to try something different, to try to break through that surface. But in fact, when I finished it, as I mentioned yesterday to somebody, when I finished it, the New York Times Magazine did an excerpt of it, and they put it through their copy editing process. And I realized when I read their copy edit and was changing it back to my own non-correct wording, that in fact I had written it after all, that I hadn't broken through.
So I'm trying to understand this. So you're writing elegiacally. You're writing about love as well as death, and you're saying at the beginning on page 7 that you have all your life written, investing everything in the surface of language, which is what's so brilliant about your writing. And you hide your thinking. You say thinking and believing. You didn't use the word feeling there. But then in the end, the book is so fantastic because it invests in the surface of language all that feeling, so you don't go deep. Am I getting it about right?
Well, yes.
That's
so
the
that's the way
thank you.
I hoped it worked.
So we have a book about mourning that's powerful, that everybody, judging from last night and from everything we've all seen in reviews and responses, that's so different because it says I'm still going to be the Joan Didion that invests my meaning in language as it is. Yesterday, one of our students, Emily, daringly asked, I did it for her actually, but she's the one who came up with the idea, asked if you were ever thinking about surviving in the big geopolitical sense of surviving Holocaust, surviving genocide, surviving when you were writing your magical thinking, and you said yes. And I wondered if we could talk about a passage in Year of Magical Thinking that we talked a little bit about yesterday, but not much. This is the walking down the hallway with the family photos. Mm-hmm. How many of you have read the book, The Year of Magical Thinking? Oh, this is great. Do you remember? How many of you remember Joan walking down the hallway of family photos in her apartment and not wanting to look at the photos? Is this a familiar? Good. This is great. I love the writer's house where everybody's up to speed. So you don't look at the photos, but you've memorized everything in the photos, and then you give it all to us. So we look at the photos through your language. That's the paradox of bearing witness, in a way.
And it's also, I want to be perfectly honest, it's also a trick in a certain way.
It is a trick to.
Yeah.
to
I mean,
so I say
I can
paradox.
tell you what's in the photos because that's the trick of that paragraph.
There is a rhetorical word for this. Rebecca's our classicist. There's a rhetorical word where you say, I don't want to talk about this.
Right.
And here's what I don't want to talk about.
Yes.
Who did that?
Parallapsis.
Thank you. What are your degrees? Do you have degrees? So it's a great, thank you. It's a great parallapsis. And so I marked on my side, not great parallapsis or great thingamajig. I marked the problem of bearing witness is that the witness to horror, to trauma, will not look directly at it, but then spends in Ancient Mariner style the rest of her days
repeating
the thing she won't look at. Mm. What a structural device. And then you do it unevenly. You tell us a paragraph on a picture, a couple sentences on a picture, and then
you come back to it later. I mean, you come back to it from another angle.
And one of the pictures you almost have a page of remembering Catherine Ross and that social scene. Mm. And then we drift off, and you almost don't come back, and then you catch yourself free associating and vortex, and you. So, does it help us to understand this as a survivor's problem?
Well, I don't know if it helps, but it's definitely a survivor's problem.
And survivors of, for instance, the Holocaust don't really ever get over it. Do you get over this?
You don't get over it. It becomes part of who you are.
Mm.
I mean, it's just part of who you're now a survivor in a certain way.
So you've learned how to survive in writing this book.
Yeah, I can walk down the hall and look at the pictures.
You can. One of those pictures you decided to put on the back. I assume you made the decision.
I did.
And it's a great photo, and it's maybe the first time Quintana used eyeliner.
It is definitely the first time she used eyeliner.
And she looks
I didn't
fabulous.
notice it until I saw the photograph.
Oh, I could ask more about that, but I have one more question, sort of a large one, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the floor. The students and I were completely taken by the moment in the Year of Magical Thinking, well, generally by your own thinking about reinterpreting other texts. Your own, and then there's a section where John reinterprets, well, not reinterprets, but thinks about one of your own texts. He's reading rereading a chapter in a Book of Common Prayer in order, he said, to work through a technical problem.
See how it worked.
To see how it worked. Then the students and I reread that chapter. We found the chapter he's referring to, and in a minute I'm going to ask you to read it, and it's very short. It's a page and a half. And I wondered, and then he praises you tremendously. John does, and he says, you really, I forgot what he says exactly, but something like, you can really write, and that's my birthday present to you. It was your birthday.
Don't ever tell me again you can't write.
Yeah, which is a more maritally complex way of saying it. Yeah, is that John? Don't ever. It's a negative that turns into the greatest compliment of all time. I would like, if you don't mind, for you to read the chapter, and I've got an extra copy of the book, and I have the page picked out. And I asked Joan earlier if she doesn't mind reading dialogue, and actually there's an F-bomb in the first sentence. So,
what page is it on?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's it's chapter 13, page 249. I think I'll try to set this up a little bit. This is the one chapter where we get to see the narrator, Joan, you may have to help me with this, the narrator, Grace, who doesn't know a lot. She's a wonderful person but can't quite figure a lot of things out. And Charlotte, who's a protagonist, who's come to this made-up Central American country called Boca Grande. And Leonard, Charlotte's husband, has finally come, and this is the one conversation that Leonard and the narrator, Grace, have. And Joan's about to read it, and John Gregory Dunn was reading it that day on her birthday, trying to figure out what was so great technically. My question for you is, what do you think John was looking for technically?
And what about this fucking bomb, Leonard Douglas said to me. He had finally drunk his second drink and then a third and a fourth. He was in no way drunk, but he gave off the sense of a man who normally had one drink, maybe two when politesse required it. A man who prized control and had been pushed in a single week almost beyond it. He had found Marin Bogart in an empty room in Buffalo. Marin Bogart is his and Charlotte's daughter, who hijacked an L-1011 and went underground. He had buried Warren Bogart, that was Charlotte's first husband. He had buried Warren Bogart in an empty grave in New Orleans. He had come to save Charlotte from an empty revolution in Boca Grande, and Charlotte was not listening. He had found his way to me, and in my house there were flowers in the vases, and ice cubes in the carafes, and clean uniforms on the maids. In my house it did not seem so empty, and I was listening. A bomb or something, she says. Don't miss the or something. I look around. I discover the back wing of the building blew up 3 days ago. I find 4 people died outright, and the 5th is dying now, peritonitis. This 5th one got caught on the table. The doctor jumped and punctured this one's fucking... Leonard Douglas seemed to have rendered himself temporarily mute. Uterus, I said. I heard there was a bomb before you came. I asked Charlotte about it. Charlotte said, I broke off. Charlotte had said that when the bomb went off, she was in the bathroom and she'd forgotten about her Tampax and had spotted blood all over the clinic without realizing it. That was all she had said. She said it wasn't near her office, I said. Never mind where it wasn't, because she goes charging in where it was. The ceiling's still falling. She gets 3 people out. She's a heroine. She's mad as hell. She's shouting, "God damn you all," the whole time. They tell me that. Charlotte doesn't. All Charlotte remembers about this bomb is it went off when she was changing her fucking Tampax. She bled. I did not know what else to say. She remembers she bled all over the clinic. Leonard Douglas looked at me a long while. He loosened his tie and closed his eyes. It was just sundown. I could hear the DDT truck outside. "Yeah," he said finally. She remembers she bled. The DDT truck was gone before he spoke again. "You didn't know about Bogota, did you?" "No, I shouldn't have told you. It upset you. I should have known." This has to do with something that is too complicated to explain. I should have known. She should have known too. Leonard Douglas stood up and picked up his jacket. He did not seem to be talking to me at all. It wasn't the way she thought it was either. I wasn't the way I thought I was. She thought I was, and Marin wasn't the way she thought Marin was, and Warren wasn't the way she thought Warren was. She didn't know any of us. "She remembers everything," I said. "You said she remembers everything." "No," Leonard Douglas said. "She remembers she bled."
Joan Didion reading a chapter from a Book of Common Prayer. So, Joan, what do you think John was looking for technically?
Well, the complicated thing that I couldn't explain, having to do with Bogota,
Right.
has to do with an emerald ring that Charlotte wears, and you see it in the one of the first times you see Charlotte, you notice this emerald ring. It's a big square emerald, and it was given to Grace by her husband, but what happened in Bogota, never mind, he was the man, it turns out that Grace's husband was the man who financed the Tupamaros. And that's what the emerald tells us. And the fact that the emerald, that's what he liked.
So John liked the fact that you managed to pull off. It was a plot device.
It was a plot device, but it wasn't intended as a plot device. I just wanted her to have. I just wanted this emerald on the scene, and then I had to justify the emerald. Yeah.
You had to justify the emerald. So what was this? Is I hope this doesn't sound like a dumb question. What was it? So later, after John's death, you went back and thought about that memory of John rereading rereading your book and praising you, looking technically, not emotionally, looking technically at something, and then you remember after he's gone, him doing that. What was so moving to you about that?
What was so moving, it was not very many days. I mean, it was, my birthday is on December 5th, and he died on December 30th. So that, the fact that we'd had this conversation 25 days before he died.
I understand. Well, it's a remarkable passage, and I have to say that the chapter in a book of Common Prayer we reread with the new thinking. In a way, this is a guide to your earlier writing. This is a way of understanding it, among other things. Thank you for reading that. Well, one last question from me, and then we'll open it up. On a slightly lighter note, you are famous for your zingers. There are, well, my favorite, I mentioned yesterday, is you go after George Will and Cokie Roberts in about 5 sentences, and they're gone. Poof. No more Cokie, no more George.
I mean, it's mainly Cokie, I think.
It's mainly Cokie. She's so annoying. Cokie, if you're watching, it's time to retire. I'm sorry. See, I don't do it as well as Joan. There's another one where some Miami Herald reporter calls the household of Raul Masvidal, and it's so bad, right? He's supposed to be a reporter reporting on a mayoral candidate, and he calls the house, and a woman answers who speaks Spanish. Can you imagine in Miami?
It's in Miami, right?
Yeah. Miami. And you...
You're calling a Cuban's house in Miami.
Yeah, and he writes a piece about how this is ridiculous, I mean, you can't even find out if it's his house, and you say, 66, I just love this. You say, the Spanish words required to find out whether the number listed for the house on Quiora Street was in fact the candidate's number would have roughly been these. E la casa de Raúl Masvidal. See, I don't speak Spanish, but I did it. The answer might have been sí, or the answer might have been no. It seemed to me, ouch, it seemed to me that there must be very few people working on daily newspapers along the southern borders of the United States. I mean, the diction is so fantastic, who would consider this exchange entirely out of reach. And fewer still who would not accept it as a commonplace of American domestic life that daytime telephone calls to middle-class urban households will frequently be answered by women who speak Spanish. So I guess my question is, one, how much pleasure do you get from the zinger, and what are some of your favorite zing targets?
Well, that one I liked. Yeah.
You didn't want to name the Herald reporter in the piece.
I did. I think I did name him.
Not in
there.
Font. No, you must have cut it out.
He had he was a column. He was a Herald columnist, actually. He was a reporter turned columnist. Tom somebody, I can't remember his last name.
We should have outed him. Any other zingers that the opening to Clinton Agonistes, in which you describe Bill Clinton?
You mean that kind of animal cunning?
Oh, do you mind terribly reading a couple of sentences? This is really Bill Clinton to a T. Can you see that?
No one who ever passed through an American public high school could have watched William Jefferson Clinton running for office in 1992 and failed to recognize the familiar predatory sexuality of the provincial adolescent. The man was, Jesse Jackson said that year to Another Point, nothing but an appetite. No one who followed his appearances on the road to the White House on C-SPAN could have missed the reservoir of self-pity, the quickness to blame, the narrowing of the eyes as in a wildlife documentary, when things did not go his way, a response so reliable that aides on Jerry Brown's 92 campaign looked for situations in which it could be provoked. The famous tendency of the candidate to take a less than forthcoming approach to embarrassing questions had already been documented and discussed, most exhaustively in the matter of his 69 draft status, and he remained front runner. The persistent but initially unpublished rumors about extramarital rovings had been, once Jennifer Flowers told her story to the Star, published and acknowledged, and he remained on his feet. I have acknowledged wrongdoing, he's told America during his and his wife's rather premonitory 60 Minutes appearance on Super Bowl Sunday of that year. I have acknowledged causing pain in my marriage. I think most Americans who are watching this tonight, they'll know what we're saying, they'll get it. They'll feel that we've been more than candid. And I guess what the press has to decide is, are we going to engage in a game of gotcha?
Thank you, Joan. So the pleasure of, I guess it's the pleasure of the wildlife documentary phrase. I mean,
yeah,
you really do love that, don't you?
But I mean, you can. I mean, I love that. I couldn't get rid of it. I couldn't drop it.
Do you have any other favorite zingers before we turn to the audience for questions?
I can't think of it.
There's some great ones. Okay, Ellie. We're ready. If you have a question, the best way to do it is to signal to me somehow by eye contact or a little wave of your hand. But the first one, you just wave all the way up if you have a question. Don't be shy now. And the students are here, and they have 1,000,000 questions. But they've already gotten 3 hours. John Avnet has one in the first row. Wait for Ellie, John. Mark?
Hello? Yeah.
There
okay.
it is.
In Your Magical Thinking, you mention the writing process with John and the fact that you had a separate office but in the apartment. I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit about how that worked, because it's very unusual for a writer to be married to another writer and to be able to work for so long, and how that manifests itself in both the personal talking to him and in the professional when he would read your stuff and he'd be someone very close to you. Because I think a lot of young writers would be very interested.
Yeah,
in that.
we worked
Thank you.
together from the time we got married. Before we got married, John was working for Time magazine. He was writing foreign news for Time. And immediately after we got married, he quit because he was having a lot of trouble. The Vietnam War was in progress, and Time had a different take on what they were being told by their reporters in the field than John did. And so he quit, and we find ourselves we moved to Los Angeles. Suddenly we find ourselves in a house on the beach in Los Angeles, 40 miles from town, and forced to sit there in a house together and write to make a living. And neither one of us, I think, thought we could do it. But over the years that passed, as the years passed, we couldn't imagine doing it any other way. And basically we would simply, each of us would go into a different room in the house every day and work. And at some point, John would usually give me his pages to read, the pages he'd done that day. I actually wouldn't give him pages until I had a chunk, like sort of a meaningful several, maybe 30 pages, because I couldn't see it taking shape in a page or two, which was all I was doing every day. So it was just one of those things where we supported each other emotionally, obviously we supported each other monetarily too.
Yes. You have a question here, Ellie.
Thank you, first of all, for coming and speaking with us. I'm just a huge fan, have been a fan since I was an adolescent, and I'm an old girl now. So I understand that you are working on a screenplay about Katharine Graham. And I was wondering, given your style, if you are using, I'm assuming you're using that same style in which you are describing the surface, and the surface, sort of implying all of the truth behind it. I'm wondering, did you know the Grahams? Did you know Katharine Graham?
I did know the Graham. I did know Katharine, yes. Not really well, but I knew her. I knew all of the Grahams. I'm not actually working on that anymore. This is the nature of how stuff goes. I did several drafts of it, and then I said I wasn't going to do any more drafts unless they committed to making it. And that didn't happen, so they kept assuring me that it was very, very high on their schedule once we got a new script. And I said, we've had enough new scripts. They didn't have the money, I think, to make it at that moment.
Thanks for the question. Yes, over here. This guy, I don't know. What's your name? Jonathan, you have been just beaming the entire time here. And for someone up here, it's always good to see someone like you.
Thank you so much for your time and your words. This question is sort of off an interview you said once. You mentioned that switching to writing on the computer in Microsoft Word sort of equated your writing to sculpture as opposed to sort of painting, and that you could sort of rework the words. And I was wondering,
using a computer at all,
right?
Did that? Yeah. I went to Word. I went to well, I was using word perfect, which was the perfect program for me, for somebody as perfectionist as I am. I don't like Word. It's sloppy. You know, it keeps slipping around. It's tricky. The perfect logic of Word perfect was fine for me. The only people, interestingly, who still use Word perfect are lawyers who work in the Supreme Court uses Word perfect.
So there's actually a current WordPerfect version.
Yes, there is. I'm not sure it bears any resemblance to the old
WordPerfect
one.
95.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. Is there another question out there? Yes, right next to this, where Jonathan was.
Hi. I wondered with your one of the things I like best about your writing is how succinctly you phrase things. And I wondered when you're approaching a new project, how much research you do, and if you ever feel muddled, if your thoughts become muddled because there's too much in there, and how you finally settle on an angle.
Yeah, I do a lot of research, and sometimes you try to get all of that research into the... I mentioned yesterday that I'd had a hard time starting Miami because I'd done quite a lot of research, and I tried to get all of it into the first paragraph, right? Didn't work.
No, it did work.
Well, but I mean...
You got it all in the first sentence.
Eventually, but only by making it a haiku could you...
Right, exactly. It's an amazing first sentence. Miami, if you haven't read Miami, you must. It is a perfect book. You said years ago, Joan, in Slouching Toward Bethlehem, when you were visiting the Haight, that you maybe it was actually in the White Album, in the section where you list the items of clothing and whatnot that you pack for a trip. You mentioned, I'm not clothes conscious enough to know what it was specifically, but some clothing that you would wear if you wanted to be other than a Haight person, and some clothing that you would wear that would allow you to pass.
You could do
used the word pass.
both sides of the culture gap.
That's right. So
there were tights were a key part of
the tights were a key part. Okay, well, this is
sort of
you learn something new every day.
Leather skirt that and a leotard that seemed to work at a certain moment in time.
At a certain moment in time, and this implied that you, although you were very scrupulous about not passing, you didn't hang out and do drugs with them. You observed them doing it, but you wanted to win their confidence. So you talk about passing, but when you go to Miami, you can't pass. When you're covering a political campaign, you can't pass. This is fairly obvious, but what's the idea of passing there? Just to fit in a little more, and what happens when you can't fit in?
The idea is to not make people uncomfortable in your presence. I mean, it's just...
It's a journalistic thing.
Yeah, if they're more comfortable, they're going to talk to you more. If they're not comfortable, if I were to walk in... Well, you know what you would think if I walked into this room this morning wearing a Chanel suit. It wouldn't be a good look.
Not for the writer's house.
and I actually have one. But there are very few places where you can pass in a Chanel suit.
Fewer and fewer, actually, every day.
Fewer, yeah.
So... I forgot the question I was going to ask, so we'll come back. Yes, go ahead. Lindsay Baker, a Didion fan from the start.
Hi again. Is this loud enough?
Yeah.
So we're talking about passing and having other people, the people you're trying to get a sense of, size you up. I wanted to ask you about how you size other people up. Are you big on first impressions, or is it more about time? The time you spend with them, the more you see. Is it about layers? And also, do you ever feel like, you said that to write about someone is to sell them out in the sense that you can't fully represent them as
their
they are.
idea, yeah.
Exactly. But do you ever feel like you either misjudged someone and for that reason totally misrepresented them?
No.
So you're good.
Well, I'm okay with it, yeah. I did have a moment of real nervousness. One time I was doing publicity for a book. This was in the past 2 or 3 years. And I was on a call-in show in San Francisco. And somebody called in and identified herself as having been so-and-so in Slouching Toward Bethlehem. All the characters, the people in Slouching Toward Bethlehem, the piece, had different names for legal reasons.
Right.
And they were all keyed to the masthead of the Saturday Evening Post at that time. I mean, that was a typical lawyer's way of, you do a baseball team, you do a newspaper staff, you can win in a slander suit or a libel suit never mind. But anyway, she identified herself as having been so-and-so in the piece. And she said that when it came out, she hated it. And she thought I had betrayed her. And naturally, I felt really horrible. And then she said, but after all these years, I think you were right. So that made me feel great. So
Judith Zarin has a question. Wait for Ellie, Judith. Thank you.
I have a technique question. In reading the nonfiction essays over again before coming here, I realized how brilliantly you nail your endings. And what seems like rambling and talking out loud always lands a 10 at the end. How do you know when you're finished with an essay, and how do you end pieces?
With
Are you
difficulty.
with
Yeah.
difficulty.
Yeah,
And
because
what's
you
that
usually
process?
you end them someplace in the wrong place first, and then you have to go back. And it used to be that John would say the ending needs a little pulling together or something, but now I just tell myself that. And I mean, you just rework it until it works. Usually it's a matter of cutting it down, taking stuff off the very end. You've usually taken it too far. You've tried to sew it up. And if you just let it lie there, it kind of helps.
That takes a tremendous discipline to let it just lie there and trust the reader.
Yeah, but it's amazingly, it always works.
Which is the essay that ends cut, take? Is it Insider Baseball?
No, it could have been Newt Gingrich.
The Newt Gingrich piece. Perfect. That says everything in that piece. Yes, sir, right here. Ellie, thank you.
I was just curious if you were at all a fan of David Foster Wallace's, if you saw any kind of similarities between his love of prose and yours, or his kind of deployment of nonfiction.
I've read him so infrequently that hadn't occurred to me. No. I mean, I like him, but
For what it's worth, I would say no. It's Kat Pruitt over here. Hello, Kat. I believe in Kat.
So one of the things that we all know is very Didion-esque, and that you've talked about already today, is staying on the surface and using
linguistically,
and using images to speak for themselves, and anecdotes to speak for themselves. And we read Sentimental Journeys in class, and in that essay you criticized the way that the New York City press has used this story of the Central Park jogger to be emblematic for the larger social problems of this city. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the difference and the proper balance that you have to strike between using images and anecdotes to be emblematic while still doing justice to the complexity of an issue or a person.
Great question, Kat. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your basic wish is to get it right, and you're not going to get it right if you tell yourself a story about it. Now, what I discovered when I was doing that piece, it had begun just as a little piece about. I was going to do a series of small pieces about New York because I had moved there a year before and didn't really understand the city. So I was going to learn about the city by reporting it. And because the jogger trial was going on that summer, I was going to do the jogger trial, just a short repertorial piece. And the first thing that happened was I couldn't get into the courtroom because I didn't have a police pass. So that basically forced me to the edges of the piece, which is where I belong anyway. And at the edges, I simply started reading a lot about Central Park and about the building of Central Park, which was one of the great projects of the 19th century. And it was a project that I realized that the whole point of the project had been to tell a sentimental story about the huge immigration into New York. It was the immigration was the immigration. It was how to say this in less than 20,000 words. Which is what I ended up writing.
Right, I was going to
yeah.
We know you can do this.
No, I'm gonna let it lie there. But it took a long time to actually get that piece right.
Kat's pointing out a paradox that that's the strongest piece that we have, where you say that narrative is sentimental, and the narrativization of a trial about a specific person dealing with a specific crime in a specific point of time gets generalized to count for all kinds of ideological and agendas.
It was a very dangerous piece.
Very daring, yeah.
Well, dangerous. I mean, it was even the New York Review, which was publishing it, kept having me go back over it to strengthen it, to plug up any holes, because it was so...
Because it would be attacked.
Because it would be attacked, yeah. And I was so grateful later for this attention that they had given it.
Which is a kind, self-effacing way of saying that Joan was right about her thinking about the trial and about the boys who were put on trial.
Well, my whole instinct about that was, I had no information, obviously. I was not in the park that night. I had no way of knowing. But there was a very ugly way about the way the press was treating the story. There was a very ugly way in which the police department it fell into the sex crimes division, which was Linda Fairstein, and it seemed to have taken on colors that had nothing to do with the case itself.
Right. When you give questions of gender and race to the sex crimes division of the New York City Police Department,
you're in trouble.
Things are going to get mucked up. And
Yeah.
what you did, as no one else did in that case, you refused to be blinded by any ideology at all. So in Miami is somewhat the same problem, although maybe less dangerous. No, actually just as dangerous. So let me ask, Jorge Mas Canosa is a tough character. And we all had such a good time, forgive me, imagining you sitting on the other side of the table for Jorge Mas Canosa. So in Miami, you don't take sides, but I have this sneaking suspicion as I'm reading it, just a sneaking one, that sometimes you were more sympathetic to the Cuban-American approach to the situation.
To the Miami Cuban, yeah. I was.
And so when we get to your critique of Nightline, which is another zinger, an easy target, I have to say, but anyway, and you talk about the Cuban-American view of Nightline, they can't quite figure it out. Why do you have these people who are sitting in opposition? You know, Ted Koppel used to get, and here from this right side and here from this left side, and they would talk. And the Cuban said, how could you have opposition without passion?
Everybody in Miami was always mentioning Nightline as an example of what was wrong with all Anglos, right? They could have they could have an argument on Nightline and not be at each other's throats.
Exactly. And you, I take it there, although you're very careful not to do this, you're detached, I take it that you were on the side of the critics of Nightline.
Well, I certainly saw where they were on their central issue, which had to do with the fact that they had been betrayed by the United States for at the Bay of Pigs, and the reason they had been betrayed had entirely to do with American domestic politics. So since that seemed fairly obvious to me, I was ready to go along with them on their otter.
But I think
wrinkles.
deep down, you also like the fact that they lived political passion, and that, as you put it on one page in Miami, they read everything.
They read everything,
and that you have to admire, right?
You would go in for coffee at some place in the morning, and people would be arguing over a column in El País.
And where else in America are you going to find that?
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Jim Gardner, way in the back, has a question. And we're getting toward the end. So, Jim, this better be a good question.
Oh, I'm going to continue this line of,
good.
In the tradition of Writer's House. It just so happens that this past weekend I had as a house guest one of my oldest and dearest friends, who was one of your sources in writing Miami. His name is Ramon Mestre. And I don't know if
he was staying with you?
Yes, he was my mentor when I was growing up and in Tampa. He's the son of a political prisoner, and he has his own television and radio show in Miami now. And he was an editorial writer at the Herald for many years. And so I remember when Miami came out, and I read it when it came out. And in the beginning of this conversation, I was struck by something Al said about writing elegiacally. And I mean, this was a community, as you know, at that time, 25 years, a quarter century removed from the Great Exile, from the Great Exodus, and in 60 and 61, that they were in many ways still in that zone between mourning the loss of something, mourning the loss of their country, and at the same time they were maturing, and I wouldn't say assimilating, but they were going from being, certainly the younger generation, of being Cuban Americans to being American Cubans. In a sense. And I was wondering if you've returned back to that community now and it's seen its changes, especially since someone like Jorge Mas Canosa is no mas.
Yeah, no mas.
No mas. You stuck that ending, Jim.
No, I haven't been back. I mean, I think I went to Miami once when John was shooting there, but I didn't get involved. I mean, I've gone to the book fair. I've done, but it's always a night. I haven't. Which is how basically, after I've done something, I tend not to return to it. Not because it doesn't interest me, but because I already said what I started out to say.
You certainly did. And I just have to say that, I have a couple of friends who know Miami very well, and you're not a Miamian, you're an outsider, and you got it in a way that must please. I mean, there are critics, I'm sure.
Oh,
but you,
yeah.
It's hard to write about a book like that and not have critics, but.
And both in the Cuban and Anglo.
Right.
Culture.
Well, you didn't pull any punches. One more from the audience, and then I'm going to close with a couple questions myself. We're going to go all the way back to... No, you know what, Vince? You had some questions yesterday, Do you mind if you defer? Oh, look at his face. Okay. Quick question. Joan's very quick at answering questions. Go ahead. Vince.
Hi, Joan. We talked a bit yesterday in class about how you've had different writing projects where you had to write in order to understand your thinking, but also to understand yourself and who you were. And I'm curious if in the years since Magical Thinking, you've either started another writing project or have conceived of one with that sort of same purpose.
No. I mean, I'm working on something, but it started with that purpose, but it may be the wrong project because it's not going in the direction of telling me what I need to know.
Midway during that question, I was worried that Vince was going to ask you whether you know who you are. Yeah. And I'm so glad we did, because we don't have time for that. One more question. Thank you, Vince. You're very charming. One more question up front. No, it's all right. Don't apologize.
Speaking of returns,
hold the mic right up.
Not going back to a place. Your writing about California has always struck me because I'm a Californian, and I sort of encountered it about the times that you wrote about things like I was in New York in my 20s, like you were, and then I went back to California, and then I read Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and it's like, back to California, and then there was where I was from, where no more California. I wonder if, will there be another chapter about California?
Well, I thought I kind of finished that in where I was from.
So you've been following Joan around.
I have.
Actually, where I was from, I even went back and deconstructed my first novel, which was a Californian. I mean, it took place in California, and that was a kind of refreshing exercise. Finally, I laid that to rest.
Well, I have a couple of privileges being the person who hosts these events, and I always like to take full advantage of my perk at the end by really asking you about my two favorite passages in your work. Unfortunately, they're each just a paragraph, or in one case, 2 paragraphs. The first is back to the White Album. It's toward the beginning of the White Album where you say something in a way about American education, about how we've been socialized and educated. And as an educator, whenever I see the word education, I always think hard about it. And in this paragraph, you taught me how important it is not to think currently necessarily the way you've been socialized, with all due respect to schools and universities and things. And this seems to me a turning point. And I was going to read it, but since you're so happy to read,
reading is my favorite thing.
Reading is your favorite thing. It's all marked up, but it's this one paragraph. This is a turning point, I believe, in Joan's thinking about writing style.
This was an adequate enough performance as improvisations go. The only problem was that my entire education, everything I'd ever been told or had told myself, insisted that the production was never meant to be improvised.
Right.
I was supposed to have a script and had mislaid it. I was supposed to hear cues and no longer did. I was meant to know the plot, but all I knew was what I saw. Flash pictures in variable sequence, images with no meaning beyond their temporary arrangement. Not a movie, but a cutting room experience. In what would probably be the middle of my life, I wanted still to believe in the narrative and in the narrative's intelligibility, but to know that one could change the sense with every cut was to begin to perceive the experience as rather more electrical than ethical.
Holy cow. There's so much there, and I looked around the audience, everybody was nodding, and I think, they were nodding at the importance, the radicalism of that gesture. As an American saying, my education taught me to be linear and to do things whole, and I'm not going to do that anymore. And the notion of the cutting room is still important to you, the notion of writing as images and in pieces, that it doesn't seem to have changed in all those years. Do you still agree with what you said in that passage?
Yes.
And how radical did it feel to reject this this socialization to narrative?
Well, I didn't have the sense that I was rejecting it. I had the sense that it had rejected me.
Right, in the White Album for sure, because you were thinking that you'd broken down.
Yeah.
But maybe you had, but you can't have broken down all the years since then. You still believe.
Well, who knows? I mean,
I knew that answer was coming. I would say no, Joan. But the next time you have the next time we, your readers, get to the point where you're breaking down is in Magical Thinking. And this is the passage that I wanted to end with, because it says basically the same thing, only in the specific context of the death of your beloved husband. You read it last night a little bit, and we began today by talking about it this hour. I thought we'd end with it. You have the phrase, "The way I write is who I am, or have become." Yet this book is a case in which I wish I had, instead of words and their rhythms, the cutting room, etc. What's so moving to me about this is that now the result of the cutting room is that the reader is being asked to pick up the pieces themselves, to pick the takes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gesture to us, to you. It's opening out. And I find it so moving as a person who loves literature and also as a teacher who wants to ask his students to do the work. So will you please conclude today's session by reading, I've marked it from, this is my attempt to the end. I'm sorry, I have a cleaner copy.
This is my attempt to make sense of the period that followed, weeks and then months that cut loose any fixed idea I had ever had about death, about illness, about probability and luck, about good fortune and bad, about marriage and children and memory, about grief, about the ways in which people do and do not deal with the fact that life ends, about the shallowness of sanity, about life itself. I have been a writer my entire life, as a writer even as a child, long before what I wrote began to be published. I developed a sense that meaning itself was resident in the rhythms of words and sentences and paragraphs, a technique for withholding whatever it was I thought or believed behind an increasingly impenetrable polish. The way I write is who I am or have become. Yet this is a case when I wish I had, instead of words and their rhythms, a cutting room equipped with an Avid, a digital editing system on which I could touch a key and collapse the sequence of time, show you simultaneously all the frames of memory that come to me now, let you pick the takes, the marginally different expressions, the variant readings of the same lines. This is a case in which I need more than words to find the meaning. This is a case in which I need whatever it is I think or believe to be penetrable, if only for myself.
Joan Didion.
Thank you.
Joan Didion. Thank you again, Joan. Everybody who's helped make this happen.
Thank you
were
all
a
for
great
coming.
audience. Joan, thanks you. We're selling 2 of Joan's books, and she has just a few minutes here, so not all of you perhaps can get the books inscribed, but please buy a copy. We're selling her book of nonfiction, collected nonfiction, and also The Year of Magical Thinking. Thank you for coming to the Writers' House.
Thank you.